What happens at laser tag never stays at laser tag.
Laser Unfocused Tag Talk.
Laser Unfocused Tag Talk.
I feel like you could be like in Ghostbusters or something.
Oh my God, you have got some stories.
Let's talk about laser tag.
Who knew you were a laser tag legend?
Time to get laser unfocused. Tag Talk with Tivia.
Welcome to Laser Unfocused Tag Talk. Hi, I'm Tivia. The 2024 Zone U.S. Nationals are shaping up to be a very competitive event, as we hear from this year's organizer, Jason Elias. I'd like to welcome my guest today. He's Jason Elias, who is a familiar face in the zone competitive laser tag community and tournament organizer for this year's upcoming U.S. Nationals that are going to be happening in Fort Wayne, Indiana, July 11th through the 14th. So welcome, Jason. Glad to be able to talk with you again.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I have very much enjoyed playing in the tournaments that you have been organizing. You've done a great job with it, and I'm sure that people are really looking forward to this year's events. But I would love to start out by just kind of getting a little bit more familiar with you and your background. And maybe you could give me an overview of your laser tag background and your involvement within the competitive scene.
Sure. So funny enough, I got into laser tag more when, well, I guess it's kind of the story for a lot of people my age. When you're younger. So when I was a kid, actually, growing up, laser tag to me was more just kind of like this kind of just culture shock when I was a child. But it was never something I really got into until I got a little bit older. I always kind of saw it growing up and then always thought like it sounded like the most interesting thing in the world, but never really got the chance to play it until maybe I was like 12 or 11. But once I got into it, then kind of just got hooked. It was just kind of like a whole different like just environment and world for me when I was a child. Interestingly enough, so I'm from Bailey's Crossroads, which is out here near DC. And during that time that I was kind of getting involved, this is when they had V4, V5 packs there, essentially. It's just the type of packs they had. And I guess because just the way people played there and just the environment, to get into or introduce yourself to competitive play, you kind of had to play public games or like during power play nights, like somewhere like a corner and just dogfight or something. That was actually like my first experience with actually like hearing anything remotely about the competitive scene. Honestly, it kind of just went from there. I got introduced to it from there, but there was never any tournaments around that time. So I just kind of just watched, practiced, played, had questions, very few answers. And it wasn't until I think, what year was that? I think it was like 2007, 2008 that there was finally a tournament that was held within our area there. There was a site in Sterling, I think, which was like one of the last V5 tournaments like in that area that was held. And that was like my first real like experience with like a competitive tournament. And I wasn't playing in it. I was a game master in it. But I mean, fast forward to like years after this, it wasn't until Nexus kind of came out that I really started to like try to get involved in the competitive scene and stuff. There was tournaments that were held, I think it kind of got like reset in the States, right? So I think around the time Nexus came out, people started playing again, essentially, because I think there's kind of like a calm period between V5 into like the Nexus era. And it wasn't until I'd say it wasn't until actual like official Nexus time when I first got like introduced into the competitive scene. And then honestly from there, as the years progressed, I just played tournaments, was never really on any official teams compared to the one that I'm originally on now. I kind of just would enter tournaments as like a spare player or conglomerate team, until I'd say about 2016, 2017, when I actually started playing with teams just officially overall all around. In terms of what I do now, though, it wasn't until I'd say about 2018 that I think it was 2018 for a Baltimore tournament where I figured if we want to kind of just start getting more information or more out there for players to watch or, spectate or kind of review, I kind of approached it with what I was more familiar with, which is, I guess, just, computers, technology, stuff like that. I had the idea of trying to see if we can get something like security cameras back then, just wired into the actual sites and see if we can get like a unique perspective of the tournament rather than just go to a tournament, everyone talks about it when they go home, and there's no real footage besides someone who would walk around with a camera and like make a podcast. Very similar to this, right? There was nothing to actually see the event itself. There was just word of mouth, essentially. Kind of just went from there, honestly. 2018, 2019, like to where we are now, there was a lot of effort in trying to find ways to either A, improve what we see in the tournament with whether it's, organizing an actual schedule that's also reasonably priced, but also, having the venue work with us or get more designs for like the scoreboard or get better camera designs, which have audio on them, you name it. It kind of just snowballed from there. And bit by bit, there was a lot of other people who helped support with the ideas. Luke, for example, in Fort Wayne, they provide a lot of feedback and ideas for coming up with unique ways to get more exposure. I tried reaching out to people to just kind of help sponsor the event or, support the venue. Even small things like challenge coins, like things like that to kind of just help make it so that you get the whole package when you come out to tournaments nowadays. And it's been great. The community has kind of just, rise, just increased in numbers year by year. I mean, last year was a pretty good tournament. And we're looking at this tournament this year, and it's gonna be one of the biggest tournaments we've had in a while, in my opinion.
And how many teams are you expecting and where are they coming from?
So as of right now, we currently have, I believe we have 10 or 11 teams confirmed. There's a possibility that we might have another 2 to 3, but we're still waiting to see what numbers look like after pre-reg is over.
Mhm.
But some of the things is, for example, a lot of like the well-known teams that are, that have been around are coming out. Philly's coming out with a team. Baltimore's coming out with a team. Our team, Sterling, we're making an appearance. Punisher, so Legends, is making a reappearance after, a decent hiatus. They're back. Um, and then one of the bigger things is that, and this is the big one, is we actually have international teams making an appearance rather than just one or two players. So we've had Sweden come out here for a visit a few times. So Moomin, you've met him before.
Mhm.
Moomin's coming back, but
Nice.
we have Australia making a team with Sweden players, and there's some pretty strong Aussie players that are going in on that team.
Well, that's
Um,
awesome.
so yeah, but we have a couple German players, I believe, making an appearance, and I think there was originally some talk about a Finnish New Zealand mixed team that's coming. But unfortunately, I think some things came up with like the airlines, and New Zealand kind of just complicated that. But it's still way more of an international just interaction or experience that we're going to have here compared to before. And all these teams are going to be really strong. Like it's going to be a really difficult tournament for anybody who's trying to think they can get the finals. It's not going to be easy.
Well, that sounds like that's going to be really interesting. And I'd love to kind of get an idea of what the whole entirety of this tournament is going to look like, because I know you always have extra things going on. So talk to me a little about like the location, the formats, the side activities. What can people expect out of this?
So for nationals this time, one of the biggest changes we have this year is compared to a typical tournament that runs overnight, this tournament's actually going to run throughout the day. Something that like everywhere else in the world they do it that way, which in the States is in most cases not a realistic goal. It's just not. It's just the way we do things here, unfortunately, right? And it's kind of just something I've learned, as a cultural difference. It's just in the States, it's much harder to do things like that just based on how the economy and everything else is here, right? Like it has to be some type of profit for the actual venue, and to rent out an entire morning kind of schedule is not easy. It's not cheap. It's a little bit more expensive. But I figured that for this year, I think it'd be a good fit for it, kind of with what's going on with like just everyone who's making an appearance here. So we are actually running this tournament from 8 a.m. to around 7 p.m. is kind of our like expected time to end each day. And that's like the big part, right? Is it's not an overnight tournament for once in its life, which I don't know. I don't have any recollection of any other like day tournament that I've ever seen or gone to, at least to my knowledge. Um, Day one, or I would say day zero, it just consists of LOR. So it's an optional kind of event. We did make a vote on what type of format for LOR we would play. And based on those votes, we kind of made a decision. So we had an option for just singles LOR, doubles LOR, or what we played at Bailey's, which was Warlords. And majority vote just kind of went with, just single LOR. So day zero essentially is an optional thing. If you want to come out and appear and play for that, you can. It's not going to be a big deal. Our side events are going to consist of just solos without bases, which again it's kind of like a debatable topic where some people lately have been playing with solos with bases on, but I figured we'd kind of keep it traditional, is what I guess I should just call it, just traditional solos, where you just play with no bases on, you just go for pack points, playing around the downstairs floor of the arena. We also have triples. So triples teams can consist of, any three players. It doesn't have to be actual players on your team. So people can make their own triples rosters. And that'll basically be the same thing downstairs with, I believe we're going to run with 6 teams and bases will be on, just like a traditional triples match. And then we have Elim, which Elim is going to be, I think we're doing 7 lives with 0.75 shots per second. And I think we're keeping it at 8 minutes, give or take, something along those lines. And then, of course, there's the main event, which is just team comp. Uh, Team comp is going to have its usual structure where we just have round robin, and then we've been kind of implementing the cascades kind of format afterwards for some time. I think it just runs better than than other structures that we've run in the past. I think cascades kind of just shapes it better, especially if we have the right amount of teams for it. I think it comes out pretty well.
Well, and I know something else that's new this year. You are, of course, the tournament organizer, but this year you have a separate tournament coordinator. And maybe you could speak to that and what is happening and why it's happening to kind of keep things running smoothly. And again, you always do wonderful events, so I've always seen what you do run smoothly, but now you've got extra hands to make it all come together, right?
Correct. Yeah. So this year was another thing was there's always I guess you could say there's always a theme to every tournament when I run it usually. Like there's always some kind of thing that I want to focus on. And I guess the biggest thing for this year's tournament was I can say structure, like organization, right? And that's enforced not just in the arena, but kind of like outside of it as well. Because a common reoccurrence issue in the States was always that, rule breaking or issues in the arena with reffing and stuff has always kind of been like a debatable issue as well. So we've been trying to, focus on that, but outside of the arena was an issue where we needed somebody, or we wanted to start figuring out a way to have somebody who can help run the event, in the front, help kind of just, make announcements, structure things without them being a laser tag player is kind of the key thing. And the biggest reason for that is just so that they're not up somebody who is going to be stuck having to go back and forth so often, because that leads to just, things like time being like just the event running behind schedule, them not being able to be found if something needs to be figured out or decided on, etc. So when looking at everything this year, we've decided that having an actual dedicated tournament coordinator would significantly help with that, because it makes it so that other people who do volunteer can just focus on their one own, responsibility or job and not have to focus on any of that either. So we have a dedicated tournament organizer, excuse me, a tournament coordinator. We actually also have a dedicated head GM. Two key parts of it, at least in my opinion, right? Tech and media work just allows me to just focus on that. Honestly, I don't have to worry about as much as other things. But our tournament coordinator is actually going to be so Luke's girlfriend is a wedding coordinator, and so during pre-nats we gave her kind of like a test run to see how she would do. She's been great. Honestly, she's been phenomenal. Pre-nats, she was able to, handle things in front, call out games during like deadlines or things that were due. She was able to make announcements online on our like website, on our website or Facebook pages, stuff like that. So yeah, her name's Emily, and during pre-nats, like I said, overall everything was great. It was a pretty good feedback almost all across the board for her. So I figured, if that's the case, we'll keep her, just going out and running all those things in particular. So we have a lot more volunteers is kind of the big thing, right? We didn't have that type of manpower back then. And it wouldn't be something that's possible in previous years until I would say honestly this one, where we have people who are willing to, go out of their way to do something that's, normally, it's always voluntary most of the case.
Well, it certainly seems like the Ultrazone in Fort Wayne has a nice community surrounding it. So it's great to see that that's working out like that. And there's a lot of planning that goes into an event like this. What does go into the planning, actually?
The biggest issues when trying to schedule or coordinate an event is always going to be the time of the year. That's always like the biggest one, in my opinion. We had an initial date that was much earlier in the year, but with the interest of international players trying to make an appearance to this event, we had to kind of go back on our original decided schedule because we had announced, I think, a time in like June or like late May originally. And then we realized that it would interfere with other events that were internationally going to it just wouldn't work. Um, so scheduling a time of the year for that has always been just like kind of like the most difficult part, at least in my opinion, that is going to work to give you the best results for like everybody to actually be able to make an appearance for it. Um, Besides that, usually the next parts really come down to finding a way to structure the event in terms of like cost, venue expenses, things like that. What things can you improve to make it better than last year is, I think, arguably the most complicated part as well. You know, people will go to a tournament, but if it's the same thing every year, it's not as interesting or it's not as exciting to people, or you know, they have previous complaints that probably weren't addressed. There's always something that can be worked on or adjusted, right? So it's kind of where like the whole process of a theme or a focus for each year is kind of comes into play. With this year kind of being the way it is, with so many strong teams coming out, that on its own, which I guess is kind of lucky, is interesting enough for a lot of players to kind of want to, you know, make an appearance and participate in this tournament. Because it's going to be a pretty big one with a lot of people that are, you know, they're going to talk a lot about this tournament. There's going to be a lot of tension when it happens. But the other focus, which, like I mentioned before, was just, you know, trying to like adjust rules, make things a little bit more consistent with rules, is always an interesting topic. It always is going to be like that in the States, right? Um, we're really trying heavily to enforce and like make sure people are familiar with the rules, right? So we're trying to push out and stress out things like a ref exam is going to be required when you join this tournament. That's actually something of an idea that kind of came from Australia. Europe has or Sweden, you know, they made a video about like, you know, do's and don'ts for like the rules of what you can do and what you can't do in the arena. And it's a good idea. It's not an idea we've really tried out here before, but I think things like this will help make the game play better, even if at first some people may find it, you know, not their favorite thing to do. But I think things like this are an interesting approach to kind of start making it so that the U.S. has a better, you know, better events and a cleaner style of gameplay in the arena, actually.
Now, something that I think is a little bit of a challenge across the board, but might even be a little bit more so with the degree of competitiveness that you are going to be seeing here, is when there's a new player who wants to break into this scene. There's a handful of places that really have competitive bases, but how would you suggest somebody who's interested and wants to get involved, get their feet wet and start getting into the competitive scene?
That's a good question. So the biggest thing is that even if, and this is the way I believe it is, even if let's say your site isn't one of like the traditional sites that we have here in the US that has a competitive arena, it doesn't mean that you couldn't necessarily get the experience that you would need, right, to actually get involved into the competitive scene. Because we had a similar experience like that actually in Bailey's, or well, not in Bailey's directly, but a place that we played at out here. It used to be called Panther. What I mean by that is, even if you don't have the actual tools to practice properly, you can still play at your site with the settings that you're familiar with to kind of introduce yourself to like how it feels and how much, you know, how much more different it's going to play. Biggest examples for that, right, are, you know, standard rules are 1 shot per second. If there's stuns available, which not every system has stuns, of course, you know, you can try that out, but it's not a requirement. But something as simple as, you know, 1 shot per second, I think is a good way to kind of just be like, all right, like this is very different rather than just running around rapid fire. Even if the base isn't like an actual base, you can still make some type of, you know, concept with that as well, which is what we did when we were back here at Panther's site. They were not real bases, but we actually ended up creating something called like a base game where there'd be like 4 or 5 of us playing around this open base and playing around like the pillars and the walls to kind of just help, you know, just your fundamental just ability to play properly and get more familiar with how, you know, the competitive scene works. Um, it's really only, it all really comes down to just how creative you want to be about it. There's no right or wrong answer, in my opinion. Um, Competitive play at first comes down to just, you know, knowing what the basic rules are. And then from there, it's enough, at least in my opinion, that if you got a basic idea from there, even if it's not perfect, the rest of it you'll experience hands-on when you participate in an event, right? You're not expected to go to an event because you think you're going to win it if it's your first tournament. You're going there because you want to experience it, and from that you actually get a much better idea of what you're looking at. that you honestly will take home anyways. You're gonna take that back home, and then the next time you practice at your site, even like I said, it's not an actual arena, you're gonna know a lot more. You're gonna have a lot more ideas of how to actually fine tune what you do with your group over there back home. Um, because that's what we did. Like I said, Panther was like that a lot. There was no bases in there at all. I don't even think there was three bases originally there. Now that I think about it, so they were just open arenas actually. And Dutton was the one I think who created that format for us. Even though it's not a real format, it's something you can just kind of get creative with and find your own. Um, that's really I think a big part of it is you have to be willing to, especially with the states. There's not a lot of competitive sites in the states. It's just the U.S. is a little tricky. um, you have to be willing to kind of, use your imagination a little bit. But I think that if you ask questions from anyone in the competitive scene about that, you'll get, similar answers, I think. They'll give you similar answers about what are some things you can do to kind of make that happen, as long as the system permits it, of course, right?
I think that's really good feedback, and you're absolutely right. And uh, leading off of that, how do you feel that these tournaments really contribute to a thriving player community?
Mm, I think the biggest thing is I feel like it's interesting to see that every year we have more and more teams. Not even that, honestly. It's being able to see the people that you come across throughout the years. I think that helps keep it nostalgic and just experience enough to make people want to come back. Because there's always conversations like, oh, you always hear about talks about, oh, like this happened at this time, or do you remember this event or whatever, right? And that because there's players that are way older than me, and I mean that in a nice way, is that they talk about tournaments or events that happened way before my time, even like I don't know about them, but I always hear about these conversations and stuff, and I think those are some of like the tidbits that I actually enjoy hearing or coming across the most when I'm at these events, rather than actually playing the tournament itself. Is I always hear stories, whether it's at like the dinner or in between matches or something. People are always talking about previous events. Um, Even though the US scene has kind of like died down a little bit, each year has, like I said, fundamentally been increasing and improving, which is very promising to see because there was a time like we had like no tournaments happening. Maybe one if we're lucky, but like it was tiny. We had six people at one time, I think, during or like pre-COVID for a tournament, and that's like almost double the number now, which is quite a bit. Um, it's it's kind of I don't know. It's a nice kind of just moment in particular to have. I think those are some, like I said, the better highlights of tournaments is I go to a tournament and I see people I haven't seen in years, or like I haven't seen throughout like a whole year. Last time I saw them was last tournament, for example. Like I see Baltimore as a good example of that. I don't hear from the Baltimore team ever, but everyone likes them. They're funny guys. Hanging out with them, just getting a drink or something. It's always a freaking hilarious time. They're great. I only see them once a year, but it's always fun because we always talk about just really funny stuff or whatever.
I think community is the running thread of why I hear most people are still engaged in laser tag, and they love the stories, they love the people. Um, what else about it do you think keeps people coming back?
Uh, I mean, I gotta tell you, it's a lot better than it used to be. Um, but yeah, I wouldn't be able to say that without like just everyone kind of just helping out and throwing in for it as well, right? There's been a lot of support and there's been a lot more just of an effort from people as a whole to kind of help make this an actual thing, right? Because like I mentioned before, nationals at one point was just kind of non-existent. It didn't really happen anymore. And even though I helped try to just like help improve it back in the day and something that kind of just took over, it's not something that I did on my own. There's people who run their own communities back at their sites who, talk about the event, who help promote the event, teach people and then talk about the experiences for it. From there, people are willing to take photos, run head GM, like stuff like that. These are small bits and pieces that I gained as support from other people and other like locations over the years. Um, that's single-handedly the biggest part about it, right? Is if more people are on board and believe in kind of like what you're trying to gain, what you're trying to gain from all this or what your goal is, then you have that, that support kind of just shows. So that's kind of where we're at now, right? Is this isn't just an event that like I oversee by myself. Maybe I make some final decisions for it, sure, and I can make some like the bits and pieces for it, but it wouldn't be about the community actually deciding to actually get involved as well. That we wouldn't have these results without that. And that's like that's a multi-site kind of effort, right? Like every small bit, whether it's Fort Wayne with their player base constantly growing, the community constantly growing. Our photographers from there, Dutton is a great person who people, like to bounce ideas off of. New teams will talk to him, or growing teams will speak with him, for example. Um, a lot of the captains will throw out ideas or discussions about some of the, events, their formats, stuff like that. All this kind of just comes into play to the point where we get what we get now. And that's a lot more support than we used to have back in the day.
You talk about a point where there might not have been a U.S. Nationals. What distinguishes the differences between like a pre-Nats and a Nats and even an internationals? Because you've got all these international players coming over, and each system sort of has different ways of going about things. So, how do you view those things?
Um, do you mean like how do I interpret like a nationals event in the States versus like another side event or another event?
Yeah,
Or
like you just came off of pre-Nats.
Mhm.
So, what was the difference between having a pre-Nats versus what you're about to do?
So having pre-nats, for example, the pre-nationals event is more of an exhibition tournament, is the way I'll call it. But it's used more than anything besides just to kind of get introduced to like the arena and like the packs and stuff. It's mainly used as a means to test out things that we're enforcing or trying to implement for this year's tournament. We always make some small adjustments to the rules, particularly based on the site that it's going to be on. And the biggest one was the biggest concerns, for example, let's say for this year, is that Fort Wayne's bases are they're a little bit close quarters. So there's a lot of like corking and issues at the base entrances where, people get stuck or people bump into each other. There's always something bad happening around the bases. So we tried to push out a couple rules in particular to kind of help mitigate the corking issue and whatnot. And pre-nets is the perfect example for trying to push those out to see if these changes are going to impact the game, harm it, make it worse, etc. Um, it's a good way to test it. And based on the feedback we get after the event is over, we kind of just, we kind of review it, or I kind of review it, see what people think, see how I felt about it. And then from there, based on feedback, I'll usually make a final decision on if we would make, further adjustments or just scrap the idea entirely, essentially. Pre-nets has been pretty good for that in general when it comes to, a couple sites and that I think kind of need it. In this case, like I said, Fort Wayne, with us trying to really crack down on the rules, um, we tested out that a big thing was we actually gave players an actual like remote to terminate players like live. We haven't done that in ages. It's been a while since someone's been able to walk around and just actually like just press a button on the player. I don't think I've seen that in like maybe like 9 years or so. So we're trying now to like really get the feel of how it's supposed to play, right? And pre-nets is a great way to test it out before we go out with the actual full finalized set itself for during nats.
That's fair, and kind of a good get your feet wet kind of option as well.
Mhm.
And Zone had such a tremendous international competitive scene. So I'd love to know what you predict for the future of competitive laser tag going forward here in the US.
Um, so first things first, I guess to kind of just clarify is I do believe that we're gonna have a committee pretty soon. I mean, I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. I think it's kind of getting to a point where with people being so involved and helping out, it's not a one person job anymore. Just how I just feel personally, right? Um, Worlds is also this year, so with that being the case, I think it's the perfect year to announce and start pushing for an actual legitimate nationals tournament committee and the opportunity to vote for our U.S. representatives for the Worlds Committee. Just because if Worlds is this year, then we need somebody for the next 4 years that are upcoming as well. That's a big, big part of kind of where I see the future going. And that's just how I feel personally, right? Uh, I think it's not a one person job. Like it can't be anymore. Like there's so much more potential about what can happen that it's not something that I realistically think I can make those decisions alone anymore. So a tournament committee for the US, I think, is a very promising thing to have starting, after this year. And based on who gets voted into that, only time will tell. But I can't imagine that it wouldn't be nothing but positive things that are gonna just further improve whether it's the player base, maybe we find more sites. There's a lot of possibilities, right? Um, but all of it is really promising stuff. And I think having that is going to be very good for the US scene. I can't recall a time that we had like an actual committee like that. And every other country that I've gone to has one. And I think they do great jobs about trying to really crack down, on various details or, topics of discussion per event per year. Um, so I'm really curious to see how that's going to play out next year when that, just in general happens. I think that's going to be very, very important.
How big are the world events in the zone community?
So it depends. I'll be honest, it really depends on the location and time frame. Like Worlds this year it should have been bigger, but in terms of like teams showing up, there's not a lot of teams going. Ironically, we'll probably have more teams or more international players from different countries at our event than Worlds. And it's not to belittle the event or anything like that. It's nothing like that. It's just the situation is very complicated right now. We may have one US team going. New Zealand and Australia are going to be at New Zealand for like because it's in Auckland. But to my understanding, I think there's only one European team going as well. So there's not a lot of international teams making an appearance out there, unfortunately. At least to my knowledge. If it was in any other like traditional case, right? I think you have maybe like 6 to 7 international representation, like people representing their countries, right? You have like US, New Zealand, Australia, Sweden, Finland, maybe France. It really just depends. The only worlds I've ever been to was when it was here in Syracuse, New York, and even
My home
then,
site, my first site.
I like that arena actually. It was a cool arena. I
I
don't know if
miss
it's
it
still
so
there though.
much.
It's still there, you know?
No, no. Once it became Fun Junction, that's when I started playing there, and they closed down permanently. I want to say it was around 2017. That
2017.
was the first
Okay.
laser tag site that I ever played and was my home site for the longest time.
Yeah, no, it was a fun arena. Yeah, Syracuse Worlds when I was in Syracuse, New York was the only one I've ever been to myself personally. But even then, like that was a very interesting experience. But I remember there was like, 5, I think, or 6 countries there, give or take. It's Worlds is a whole different just animal though. Like I feel like there's so much that gets put into Worlds that I can only fathom what it's like. Like it's a lot. Um, it's just normally I feel like most Worlds events will have a lot more teams representing different countries. I think just the situation's just a little specific one. That's all. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe other countries are going to show up. I know the US was trying to have 2 teams, but I think one of our teams just kind of dropped out last minute. But I haven't heard too much about Europe, but I heard that that's a big concern. It's a little expensive right now, for where it's located. So I think that's the reason why there's a lack of European teams that are going to be making a showing this year. So you will see a lot of Australian and New Zealand teams at Worlds.
Well, and that's fair. It's very difficult to get an entire team to be able to do some of the immense traveling that's involved, but it's awesome to have, some good, strong U.S. representation there. And so I'm glad to hear that.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think can be done just in general to develop greater interest in laser tag?
In the States, I think Fort Wayne is doing it the best way, which is advertising it at the actual venue and site itself. Um, you're probably familiar. In the US, it's always been a gray area about the competitive scene and the public scene for laser tag venues to actually push for it. It's always been hard to get competitive environments or just scenes enforced or pushed out for, like recommended at certain venues. Usually site operators or owners they're not really too proud or happy to kind of do those things. But Fort Wayne has they have it right? They actually have a dedicated competitive scene. Luke is the site operator there, so they're able to advertise it in every way they can. They have just TV, just replaying broadcasts of the event. People see it, they ask about it. People get introduced into the competitive laser type scene just from something as simple as that. Smart idea.
Mhm.
Convincing your venue to maybe run like a leagues or anything like that would probably be like your first step to it. But it's like I said, it's very tricky in the States, I think, to kind of push and really push out for that. We do have plans, for example, here at Bailey's to try to start aiming for something like that, like a leagues night to get other other players and interested in the competitive scene. But it's kind of a work in progress. it definitely is something where I think like running a leagues night or something like that or a competitive night is definitely like the right approach if people, want to inquire about it. It's definitely the best way to do it. At least in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I think you are absolutely right with that. And having been around quite a few tournaments yourself, what would you say are some of the more unusual experiences that you've had while participating in a tournament?
Unusual. Let's see. Trying to think what would be like my most awkward moments in laser tag that at least can come to my mind. Because I don't think I have too many weird ones. I think the only weird ones would be, well, actually, no. If we're talking about international ones, I think Sweden probably takes the cake because Sweden there was they have a site in Gothenburg when I went there back in what was it, like 2018, I think maybe. I think it was like 2018. Um, they they had a site that had Nexus, but what was interesting is they had a format that was a very interesting format. So they had an Elam format that was full arena, up and downstairs. They played zero point 0.5 shots per second. And with every team in the arena at a time, the way they do it is I think it's like after every 2 games or something like that, like a team gets cut out, and then eventually you have less and less teams. So our team was a conglomerate team, and we had some strengths, we had some weaknesses, but if we ever kind of just like got cracked out of an area we were holding, we would kind of just like scatter and run somewhere because we had to try to survive. And it was an interesting tournament because I kid you not, I remember every single time that we got kind of cracked out of an area because we were kind of easy to push. We ended up running upstairs to this little square box cubicle, and it's the only part of the arena where the only entrances are like these two hallways that are about like 4 or 5 feet across, and that's the only way to get into the cube. And so with this little cube here, whenever we fell back and tried to survive somewhere, we would all just like sit in this cube with like two teams on both sides just staring at us. And we would live. They would try to push in, but there's so many of us in there, we would trade and they would eventually, not want to get knocked out. So we did this, we would survive. We did it again. We got cracked out. We ran to our cube. We survived. It got to a point where people were getting so frustrated with it that in semis, um, we were like, all right, we're just gonna go back to our cube because it works. And we were gravely mistaken. During semis, I kid you not, this cube, which is by the way only like if you compare to cube size, it's literally like 5 by 5 feet just across. Kid you not, we had like 12 players starting the cube with us because everyone was just sick of it. And so I literally could not turn anywhere because everyone is just lined up across this cube, just shooting each other until we died. And it's like I really wish I took a photo, but it was literally just like 12 people. I'm not kidding, like 12 actual like just adults standing all across this cube that nobody can fit in, just shooting each other, not moving because people were so sick of us sitting there. It was really freaking funny. Like I could not stop laughing about it. I remember I wrote about it on Facebook somewhere. I gotta find it. I can show it to you later. But it was the most like just cluster, like just it was just crazy funny. I could not stop laughing about it. But it was definitely one of like the weirder moments that I've had in a tournament, like experience wise. Like it's you don't see that happen ever. Especially in like an actual like competitive tournament. People aren't just like, you know what, screw this. We're gonna start with them here. And then another team starts with us there. And it was definitely a funny time. That's definitely like I think like top like moment for me, at least personally.
All right, that's a good one. I love to hear the stories. And I kind of like to wrap with something really positive, like what's your favorite tournament memory?
Favorite tournament memory is kind of hard to answer that one because I have so many. Uh, I don't know if I can answer that. Honestly, like I have a lot of moments that I enjoy. I mean, I do all this just because I really just enjoy the sport more than anything else. I'm not really. I don't know. I grew growing up. Laser tag's kind of just been like an important thing for me, right? So that's why I travel. It's why I try to like get involved. Um, I'm just passionate about it, right? Like, back then I used to be a little bit more ignorant about that and think I had something to prove, but then as I got older, I realized I just enjoy the game more than anything else. Like I don't care if I'm the best or not. Um, being able to still play because like I'm 35 now, so I look back at this, right? Like I'm 35. and I'm still playing laser tag with people that I've known since I was a kid. Like I think that says a lot, right?
Absolutely.
That's to me, I wouldn't trade that for anything. Like it's nice to see that, 20 plus years later, there's still people that you knew from back then that you can still, play the game with, that are still around. They're still willing to compete and, just in general be around to participate. So I wouldn't trade that for the world.
I think that's a great answer and great memory right there. Well, I think that it sounds like you're going to have a really successful U.S. Nationals coming up, and I wish you lots of luck with putting all that together with everybody who contributes to it. And I'd love to wrap things up here with a little rapid fire tag talk. Quick questions to you, quick answers back. You game?
Sure. Go for it.
All right. Favorite site ever?
Gothenburg, the original site that they played on.
Favorite site you've played in the U.S.?
Syracuse.
Favorite game format?
Team comp.
Favorite prize or souvenir?
I'm gonna say challenge coins for sure.
Oh, yes, you do a nice job with those. I like those. Favorite concession at the snack bar, if they have one?
Uh, Reese's peanut butter cups, oddly enough. Yeah.
Love that. And favorite brand of We Never Run in the Arena shoes?
Pumas.
All right. Anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up here?
No, I think we covered a good amount of stuff here in particular. Yeah.
Well, I think that it sounds like you've got a great event coming together. And again, that's going to be the Zone U.S. Nationals will be at Ultrazone in Fort Wayne, July 11th through the 14th. And I thank my guest, Jason Elias, tournament organizer, for being with me, Jason. This was fantastic, and lots of luck at the Nats.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks for checking out this episode of Laser Unfocused Tag Talk. Listen for more episodes on the first and third Friday of each month. Want to be a guest on an upcoming episode? Find out more and follow my blog and website at TiviaChickLovesLaserTag.com.